Another country added to the list that Israel strikes whenever it feels like it. More evidence the UK government have lost control of the border. And what has been found on a US military radar. This plus more on today's episode. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you're well. I hope you're having a nice week. Well, we've woken up to, once again, more news that Israel have decided to strike another sovereign nation. This time it's the nation of Qatar, where, as you know, it's been spoken about right from the beginning of this conflict that the Hamas leadership is based in Qatar, which just is the clearest evidence that you should need that the Hamas leadership don't care about the Palestinians, because if they did orchestrate October 7th, then they're not the ones that have faced the consequences for the last 2 years of those actions. They've been sat in Qatar. So there is questions about why Qatar would be protecting these people. However, there has been numerous talks in the last few weeks about peace, about negotiations, about ceasefires, about return of hostages and so on. And whenever that seems to be feeling like it's close, Israel does something to derail it. It will carry out a strike. It will carry out an aerial attack on parts of Gaza, and so on. It's very, very clear that the last thing this Israeli government want is peace. We've said that many a time, because peace stops them having the justification, or stops them having public support, which is waning, fantastically waning, to go in and take over, which is what they want to do. They don't want this conflict to end. They want to go in and take it over, because there's a number of factors at play here. The Greater Israel Project is obviously one. And also Netanyahu's grip on power is very much dependent on this conflict. Israel over the last decade have had so many elections, and he's failed to get a majority every time. It's always been some kind of makeshift coalition that has kept him in power, because he's incredibly disliked in Israel for good reason. The guy's a war criminal. And it's very clear that through this conflict, it's not been about returning the hostages to the families. It's been about prolonging this conflict more and more and more to get the outcome that they want, which is to take over Gaza. So this story was out of the blue, but not unexpected. Israel tend to do whatever they want, whenever they want, because they know there's no repercussions for them. There simply isn't. The court of public opinion, of which they're losing the battle massively already, that's the only repercussion for the state of Israel, for their actions. The US aren't going to do anything, NATO aren't going to do anything, neighbouring countries, with the exception of Iran, who fired back, aren't going to do anything. So apparently Trump is not thrilled about this strike. So for some context, what the strike is, if you believe the official narrative to be coming out, is that Israel carried out a strike on the Hamas leaders in the Qatari capital Doha. Hamas have claimed that its leadership team have survived. Israel claims that they've all been killed. Now, Donald Trump has come out and said that he's not thrilled about it. He wasn't given prior knowledge. He was told just before the attack happened, and that it was too late. It was too late to change anything. It was already in progress, but he wasn't given prior warning that they were planning it.
I'm not thrilled about the whole situation. It's not a good situation, but I will say this: we want the hostages back, but we are not thrilled about the way that went down today.
You were caught by surprise.
I'm never surprised by anything, especially when it comes to the Middle East.
How did you learn about this?
I'll be giving a full statement tomorrow, but I would tell you this: I was very unhappy about it, very unhappy about every aspect, and we got to get the hostages back. But I was very unhappy about the way that went down.
Qatar have called it a blatant violation of international law, which it is. You've carried out an airstrike on a sovereign nation. PM Benjamin Netanyahu has said there is no immunity for Hamas leaders. Now, there's stories through the day of so far that, you know, Trump is very angry at Netanyahu, and what's this going to mean for their relationship? It's going to mean whatever the cult want, which is that Trump gives Israel whatever they want. Trump has been the most pro-Israel president in history. It's not been the MAGA movement, it's been the MIGA movement. It's been make Israel great again. The amount of money, the amount of support, the amount of arms, the amount of shielding from public backlash, including banning visas for students who support the Palestinians, including shutting down protests and people trying to raise awareness of what's going on, including this new anti-Semitism law in the US. It's so clear that Trump is absolutely owned by these people. And you only have to look back at his financial history at times when he's got in this huge financial mess, because he's not this brilliant businessman perception of him is. He's ended up in a situation where he is beyond bankrupt, hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, and who bailed him out? You've only got to look into that particular rabbit hole to see very clearly that Trump is owned by these people. You've only got to look at who his donors were in his first election campaign. Sheldon Adelson, for example, one of the most influential ones, and now his wife with the money that he left her in this latest election. There's still so much influence now, not just the fact they bailed him out all those years ago. There's still all this influence now, hence why he's done everything they want. He's moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He's allowed strikes to go on in Iran. He's been and he actually carried out US military strikes in Iran. It's very, very clear to see that the dynamic is not how it's sold, that the US is this big superpower and Israel is the little cousin they're trying to look after. No, the power dynamic is very much the other way around. And I always say when the power dynamic in the public arena appears to be a certain way, it's almost certainly flipped. So, for example, again, we're told that Britain is this smaller state essentially beholden to the US and hoping the US back it, when the power really lies significantly more here in Britain than it does in America. America is just used as the testing ground for social changes, and it's also used as the world's military. It's used as the world's police for this cult. So what happens next is the key question. Well, as we've said a few times, when you know the outcome, and you know that the outcome is prolonged conflict in terms of what the cult wants, then anything that's going to bring that to an end, anything that's going to stop that, will always have to be moved to one side. So when there's discussions of peace, when there's discussions of ceasefires, when there's discussions of the end of the war, there's always going to be things that are going to get in the way of that from their manufactured things, because they don't want to bring an end to the war. So a lot of things have to happen to bring about the outcome they want. So we saw the video a few months ago of Trump's Gaza, the Riviera of the Middle East. Israel have also talked about the fact they're going to occupy and take over Gaza. They're running an operation at the moment in Gaza City to take it over. They've ordered nearly 1 million people to leave. And go where, exactly, is the question. To go where? Nowhere is safe. A lot of things have to happen to not justify, because that's not a justifiable action, but to give them the illusion of a justification to do it. And an end to the conflict, a ceasefire, the return of the hostages, is the last thing they're going to want to try and bring about that outcome, isn't it? Because all of a sudden then, this whole war, which the illusion has been about destroying Hamas and bringing back the hostages, that's been the sales, the PR line from Israel. Well, if those two things happen, what's your justification to go in and take over? There isn't one. So they don't want that. That's why throughout this whole process, there has been numerous protests ongoing in Israel against the way that the regime are handling the return of the hostages, because it's clearly not been about that. It's clearly not been about that. There was an agreement on the table from Hamas to return all the hostages the day after October 7th, October the 8th, 2023. It was turned down. Because it's not about returning them. It's about destroying the homeland of the Palestinians in Gaza so they can walk in and take it over. They've pretty much done the job already. They now just need to get the Palestinians off the land. So I feel like they're trying to create an environment that is so dark for the Palestinians that when they then offer a solution, which is Egypt, Jordan, northern Saudi Arabia, whatever it is, all of a sudden that's much more palatable to them, because what's the alternative? So this is a story from Sky News. This is many reasons for Israel to hate the old men of Hamas, but it's hard to see how the Doha strike helps the hostages. Well, point I just made, it's not meant to. The Israel airstrike on the Qatari capital Doha is a step change in the way they are tackling their enemies, but not only the latest in a series of them. In the past, Israel have used stealthier means to dispatch foes with plausible deniability. They've used targeted assassinations, things like that, where everyone knows it's them, but there's not a headline about it because you can't pin it to them. It's not an airstrike from one of their aircraft. It's not a missile launched from their territory. So when it came to Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in 2024 in the Iranian capital of Tehran, they didn't bother with anything as subtle as poison or strangulation. They blew him up in an airstrike. So that obviously happened last year, if you remember rightly, and there was national mourning. And that's when first Iran sent a few missiles back towards Israel, but then it kind of died down and then it ignited again, obviously, this year. Now it's launched another one. But this is the difference they're talking about, is it's not in a nation that is actually hostile towards Israel. You know, Iran has always been a foe of Israel, whereas Qatar is owned. Qatar has US military bases there, which was subject to a target by an Iranian strike a few months ago. It's what you would say on a geopolitical scale, it's a friendly nation towards Israel. They have diplomatic ties, they have embassies and things like that. So you've essentially invaded a friend. You've essentially, invaded the sovereign airspace of a friend, which again just shows the contempt that Israel and the regime there have for other nations and for the borders of other nations, while they are, running around saying that they have the right to defend themselves. I'd be very interested to see, I'm just conjecturing here for the sake of it, to be honest, because I don't believe in any form of conflict, but. Let's say, for example, Israeli warplanes that carried out this strike were shot down in Qatari airspace by Qatari defence systems. What would the headline have been this morning? Would it have been that Israel have violated the airspace of a sovereign nation and that sovereign nation defended itself, as we're told every sovereign nation has the right to do? And this is going to be very appropriate when we come on to another story later in the show. Or would it have been Qatari terrorist attack or Qatar attacks Israel? Which one would it have been? I would very much predict it would have been the latter. Yet if it had been the other way round, it would have been Israel is simply defending itself, because Israel can only defend itself apparently. It's never the offender, it's never the aggressor, it's never the one that is trying to initiate the conflict. I'm not even sure offender is a word, so I apologise on that one, but it sounds like it should be a word. You know what I mean. It's very clear to see that there is two rules. Now, we've spoken about this when it comes to many different subjects. We spoke about it on Monday when it came to the actions of politicians. But when it comes to nation states and the way that they behave, there is clear double standards between different nations. Clear double standards between different nations. We're seeing the same thing in Ukraine and Russia. So what happens next when it comes to this conflict? Well, the conflict feels like it's at a bit of a stagnant phase. Because, as I've said, when they want the outcome they want, which is to rid the land of the Palestinians, a lot needs to happen for that to be something that they can get away with. Because although they're losing the court of public opinion battle because of the way that they have behaved, the way that they have targeted children, the way that they have targeted civilians, and what they have done in terms of aid and blockades in Gaza, they've lost the court of public opinion. I don't think that's ever coming back. You've got a few mouths for hire in the media that are still parroting the same narratives. You've got Julia Hartley-Brewer here in the UK and others that are still parroting this. Israel is the bastion of morality when it comes to conflict, and everything is down to Hamas, when you've only got to look at how the conflict started. I know we've said it many times. This October 7th cross-border attack was allowed to happen. Absolutely allowed to happen. That's not a conspiracy theory. The Egyptians warned them. The Americans warned them. The story's been in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, in the Jerusalem Post, the Israeli newspaper, pointing this out. So when you are warned an attack is imminent, what do? You bolster security. Well, in Israel's case, on October 7th, they didn't not only bolster security, they actually lowered it. Now, you don't do that unless you want something to happen. Very, very clear. Because they needed the justification, or the illusion of a justification, to do exactly what they've done since October 7th now. And without that catalyst, none of that would have happened. In the same way, without 9/11, none of those wars in the Middle East would have happened. Without the Gulf of Tonkin, the Vietnam War wouldn't have happened. Without the killing of Franz Ferdinand, the First World War wouldn't have happened. There's always these catalyzing events that create the start of this outcome that they want, the journey towards the outcome. You know, what happened here in the UK last year with the Southport attacks. Without that, would all those arrests, that civil unrest, this discussion about further facial recognition technology, none of those things would have been able to be justified. These new laws that were implemented, they were justified because of that event. Now, what's very clear to point out is that doesn't mean you're saying that people haven't died. The civilians are always the pawns in the game of this cult. What it means is the circumstances around what happened and how it happened and who was behind it is not what you're being told. For me, that's what a false flag is. Now, but when you say false flag, people get offended and they say, oh, so you're saying nobody died. Not saying that whatsoever. There has been false flag events over the years, which you look at the evidence and go, I'm not sure that even happened. But when it comes to the vast majority, like the ones I've just listed them, you're not saying it hasn't happened. You're just saying that the official narrative of how it happened and who did it and why they did it is very different from the truth. That's very, very clear. That's why so many times when you look into any of these major catalyzing events that have changed the course of history, that have changed the course of direction of a conflict or a social policy or a society, they don't stand up to much questioning. The official stories don't. When you start to dig into them, they're full of holes. They're full of things that you go, well, that doesn't add up. Well, that contradicts that. You only got to look at 9/11, 7/7s. You only got to look at those events to go, well, 5 minutes of actual objective investigation will highlight that couldn't have happened how you're being told it happened. October 7th is exactly the same. And the reason we talk about it, the reason I'm going back to it, is because everything that has happened since could not have happened if that didn't happen. And if the illusion of how that happened gets dispelled and there's a clear understanding and a clear acknowledgement that actually Israel allowed it to happen and were potentially even involved in the planning of it. And I'm not talking about Israeli citizens, obviously. I'm talking about the regime. And I'm not even talking about every member of the military, because lots of military personnel have come out and said, we were told to stand down. I don't understand. But there is as there is with every government, there is a clique. There is a clique of people that are the ones really calling the shots. And everything that goes out from them goes out on a need-to-know basis. If that is proven beyond any reasonable doubt in the minds of enough people, this conflict changes. Because how can you justify any of this? The whole attitude towards Israel changes. The whole way that whole thing is viewed changes. And everything changes as a result. Because you can't keep up this illusion of being a morally superior state who is just trying to protect its borders when people have proven that you were the ones that infiltrated them in the first place and threw your own citizens under the bus, just like you did when you made it Pfizer's lab, Mr. Netanyahu. How many people in Israel suffered a dreadful, dreadful response to that vaccine as a result of your decisions? Those draconian policies. Why do, Orthodox Jewish rabbis who protest against what you're doing in Gaza, why do you attack them? Probably more than you attack even people like us. Because they dispel your illusion that you are representing the Jewish people. You're not. You're representing your own interests. You're representing the interests of a cult around you that actually despise Jewish people and have used them throughout history as a shield for their actions and are continuing to do so. Doesn't take much research to get to the bottom of that. It really doesn't. And what they know will happen and has happened over the last couple of years as a result of the actions of Israel is people's anger have turned on the Jewish community as a whole. When there's large numbers of them who absolutely vehemently oppose what Netanyahu and the state of Israel are doing. There's protests in Tel Aviv almost every day. There's people, your students burning their conscription papers, refusing to go and fight in the military. Yes, there's psychopaths in there as well that think what they're doing is great because they've been conditioned since the day they were born to hate them. But the opportunity to highlight this now is bigger than ever before because it's so abundantly obvious. Whether it's the fact that, as I said, it was Pfizer's lab, whether it's the fact that this was never about returning the hostages, it's clear that this regime does not care about anyone except its own interests. It certainly doesn't care about its own people. And it certainly doesn't care how many Palestinian civilians and children that they murder along the way to achieve their aims. And now, this morning, another country is added to the list. It's time for this to stop. I don't care if you're called anti-Semitic. I don't care if I'm called anti-Semitic. I really don't care. Being called names has been a way that people have been shut up and silenced throughout history, certainly when it comes to this subject. And it's time to grow up and it's time to accept that actually names are just words, but the actions are what you need to call out. And I'd very happily be called an anti-Semite. I'm not. I believe in respect and everyone's right to live their life and not impose it on others. How does that work for the people of Gaza right now that are having the will of an Israeli regime imposed upon them? It doesn't, does it? Right, if you want to head over to Iconic, you can watch the rest of the show. We're going to be getting into the Labour border crisis. We're going to be getting into more on the Ukraine conflict. And we're going to be talking about a really fascinating story on US military radar that spotted a UFO over in Yemen. And we're going to talk about why that all of a sudden is being discussed now. So head over to iconic.com. The link's in the description. I'll catch you there.